It's a mindfulness retreat. And when we talk about mindfulness, there are two aspects that we are going to be looking at in mindfulness. We're going to be looking at what's called cultivating mindfulness, meaning strengthening our mindfulness. And that in Buddhism is often called the shamatha practice. And then we're also going to be then applying mindfulness. And in Buddhism, this application of mindfulness is then called vipassana, or insight practice. So the cultivating mindfulness, or the shamatha practice, we'll be giving an introduction into that over the next 3 days. So tomorrow, Thursday and Friday morning. And then we'll be moving into the application of mindfulness, into the vipassana practice on Friday afternoon and Saturday morning. And then, of course, this retreat is part of the Buddhism A to Z program. And so as part of that, we're also going to, in this retreat, in the evening sessions, look a little bit at the life of the Buddha and some of the core teachings of the Buddha. Just sort of an introduction into that in the evenings, each evening session. So starting tomorrow, so that'll be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday evening session, we'll have a little discussion about that. And then also, of course, these practices of mindfulness, whether it's the cultivating mindfulness or applying mindfulness, it's good to have a balance when we do those practices. And so we're going to balance these practices with some practices from the compassion wing of the practice. So each afternoon session at 2 o'clock, we're going to be doing a little practice with the compassion wings. Things like loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity over the next 3 days to give us a little bit of balance to the mindfulness practice. So the goal of this retreat is to simply learn the practices, learn the actual meditation techniques, get a little bit of experience with those, and then also learn how to integrate these practices into our daily life. So that is the goal of this retreat. So therefore, what I'd recommend is to let go of any expectations of maybe having some sort of profound meditative experiences and so on. That's not the goal of this retreat. It's simply to learn the practices, know how to do them, so when we go home we can continue to do these practices at home. And to help us to get the maximum benefit out of this retreat, we're going to be running this retreat in silence. So the silence will start this evening when you go to bed, and will be silence through till Saturday lunchtime. And by maintaining silence, then it gives us an opportunity to really focus on these practices and not to get distracted by lots of chatting, and we'll really find that we'll get the maximum benefit from this practice if we maintain that silence very well. So of course, in my sessions, what we're going to be doing is I'll explain the practice a bit, we'll do some meditation, and then after the meditation there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. But outside of these classes here, then of course we're maintaining silence throughout the rest of the day to really get the maximum benefit from this practice. Because it's very rare actually to have an opportunity to be silent in our normal life. And so often I find people commenting to me at the end of these sorts of retreats that actually silence was one of the best things in the retreat, because it gives us an opportunity to really look at ourselves and really focus on ourselves and not just sort of get distracted by lots of unnecessary talking. So let's begin with a little bit of a introduction into mindfulness. So mindfulness here is, of course, coming from the Buddhist context, and this word mindfulness is coming from the original Sanskrit word the original word in Sanskrit was smrti, and the Pali word is sati. And both of these words here literally mean memory. So mindfulness is basically our ability to remember the object. So here, mindfulness is defined as our faculty of sustaining attention continuously upon a familiar object without forgetfulness or distraction. So mindfulness is simply our ability to hold the object, to focus on the object without becoming distracted. That's mindfulness. What we need to be aware of is that in a lot of modern day mindfulness traditions, they have often redefined the word mindfulness to mean something a little bit different. So some of the modern day traditions, you'll find that they define mindfulness as something like a non-judgmental awareness of whatever is arising in the present moment. Very good thing to do, but this is not really how the word mindfulness was originally defined. So when we use the word mindfulness in this retreat and in the Buddhist context, again, it's our ability to hold or focus the object without becoming distracted. So why is mindfulness important? Of course, in everyday life, it's very important because mindfulness is simply developing our faculty of attention. So if we can't focus well due to being either distracted or very dull, then we're not very effective in anything we do in our life. We're not very effective at work. Often that leads to a lot of agitation and stress. We end up with a lot of mental imbalance. It's much more easy to get caught up in agitation, aversion, craving, and so forth. And then also what we find is that we often then get caught up in our thoughts, emotions, and memories, and we often get overwhelmed by our thoughts and emotions, and so we end up being the slaves of our own mind. And also, what we find is if we don't have good mindfulness, good attention skills, we don't even really enjoy the simple pleasures in life as much as we could. So therefore, if we can cultivate mindfulness, if we can improve our attention skills in everyday life, then of course we're going to be much more effective in everything we do, much more effective at work, much more calm mind, much less agitation and stress, much better mental balance, and instead of being the slaves of our mind, we'll become the masters of our own mind. And what you will find also is that you're going to enjoy the simple pleasures in life much more than you do now. But here, of course, we also, mindfulness is also very important in Buddhist practices. And in all Buddhist traditions, we have three core areas of practice. That in all Buddhist traditions, the three core areas of practice are ethics, concentration, and wisdom. Ethics, of course, is to simply avoid harmful behavior, harming others. Of course, therefore, we need mindfulness to be ethical, because often what happens is we receive some stimulus and then we often react. And often we react in not very good ways. So if we want to improve the way in which we interact with others, then to be more ethical, mindfulness is very important. Concentration, of course, is to develop single-pointed concentration. So the practice of cultivating mindfulness, this shamatha practice, this is this concentration practice. So if we want to develop single-pointed concentration, then mindfulness, of course, is very important. It's the main tool we use. And then we have wisdom practice. And here the wisdom practice in Buddhist context is to come to realize the nature of reality. Because the Buddhist assertion is that the reason we have mental afflictions and suffering is that we have a distorted view of reality. We don't see reality as it is. And so therefore, if we want to overcome our mental afflictions and suffering, we need to gain an insight into the nature of reality. So this wisdom practice, of course, is when we apply mindfulness. The Vipassana practice is the wisdom practice. So we can see that in all areas of Buddhist practice here, mindfulness is important, very important. So let's have a look at the two aspects of mindfulness that we are focusing on in this retreat. So the first of those is to cultivate mindfulness, simply to improve our mindfulness, improve our attention skills. So this is the concentration practice, and often in Buddhism this is simply called shamatha practice. And shamatha is a Sanskrit word which we can divide into two. The first word, shama, means calm. And ta means to remain or abide. So often shamatha practice in English is called calm abiding, meaning we want to develop a mind that is very calm and abiding or concentrating or focusing on a single object. So this is what shamatha practice means. We're developing single-pointed concentration. And then the wisdom practice, when we apply mindfulness to gain an insight into the nature of reality, this is often called Vipassana practice, or in Pali, Vipassana. So the word Vipassana is, again, a Sanskrit word. The Pali word is Vipassana. And in those words, the VI prefix means higher or superior. Passana or pasana means to see. So Vipassana practice means higher seeing, seeing beyond. So this is often translated into English as insight, insight into the nature of reality. So these are the two main practices that we are going to introduce and practice in this 5-day retreat. First 3 days, we're going to look at how to cultivate mindfulness, how to do this shamatha practice, to improve our attention skills, to develop single-pointed concentration. And then on Friday afternoon and Saturday morning, we're going to use that concentration. We're going to apply mindfulness to gain an insight into the nature of reality. So we're going to then engage, we're going to learn this Vipassana practice introduction and learn it a little bit on Friday afternoon and Saturday morning. So what I'd like to briefly do now this evening is give a brief introduction into the shamatha practice. Before I do that, is there any questions so far? Anything not clear? So let's have a look at now how we are to train in shamatha practice. The first point is what's called preconditions. What this means is to set up our life in such a way that is conducive or supportive for this practice. Because what we find in the modern world is that this mindfulness is now becoming very popular, even a little bit trendy. But unfortunately, how it's often presented in the modern world is that usually they take it from the Buddhist context, they take it out of the Buddhist context, and then they sort of look at all the other things there and they go, oh, that's that religious stuff, so let's get rid of that, and let's just use mindfulness. It's only mindfulness. So then they give you the mindfulness pill, and they say, take the mindfulness pill, and all your problems will go away. They won't go away. Because if we want mindfulness to be effective, we need some framework around that mindfulness. And often, unfortunately, a lot of the modern traditions throw that away for whatever reason, and they only give you bare mindfulness. Which means, in fact, it's lost its transformative ability. Its capacity to transform has been lost because we've thrown away the framework. And on top of that, if we have a dysfunctional lifestyle now, and then we take the mindfulness pill, that may actually amplify our dysfunctional lifestyle. You may find you'll actually even get more suffering. So we need a framework. And so these preconditions are part of that framework. How to set up our life in such a way to get maximum benefit from mindfulness. So we're going to look at some of these preconditions on Saturday afternoon. So, the practice. The shamatha practice, any practice, always has two parts. Meditation and integration. So whatever practice we do, if we only meditate a little bit on that each morning, but then we jump up and run around like we normally do all day, then I think we're not going to make much progress. So whatever practice we're doing, of course we need to meditate to internalize in the morning. But then whatever we're meditating on in the morning, we need to bring that into the day. We need to integrate it into the day. So here, of course, in the shamatha practice, the meditation is to focus on an object, to strengthen mindfulness. But then we need to do something the rest of the day to keep working with mindfulness. And so we're going to be looking at, again, particularly on Saturday, how to integrate mindfulness into daily life. And then also, for any practice we do, it's often good to have some way of understanding, are we going in the right direction in our practice? So a little bit later in this retreat, we're going to have a look at the stages of progress. What stages do we go through in this shamatha practice so we can see if we're going in the right direction or not in our practice. So what I'd briefly like to do now is just focus a little bit on meditation. And with meditation, when we sit down to meditate, this also has two parts. in meditation, there is preparation and then the actual meditation. And often people forget about the first one. They just sit down and start meditating. And then often it doesn't go very well. It's because they haven't prepared themselves well. Just like if we're playing sport. If we just start playing the sporting activity and we don't warm up and prepare ourselves, usually it doesn't go very well. Maybe we even get injured because we're not warmed up. So similarly, we need to prepare ourselves well at the beginning of a meditation session so that it goes better. So that's what I'd like to briefly talk about now, is how to prepare ourselves well at the beginning of a meditation session. And in the preparation, we can talk about preparing body, speech, and mind. Preparing the body, of course, is to set up a good posture. Good posture is important in meditation because we want to put the body in a state where basically we can forget about it and it doesn't cause problems in the meditation. So there are a number of things with the posture, but in general, with the posture, two things are important. One is to keep the back nice and straight. Because if the back's not straight, you're sitting here like this in meditation, I'd say there'd be a high probability you're going to get very sleepy. So keep the back nice and straight. Now, for many of us in our modern world, when we sit cross-legged, we're not very flexible. Which means that when we sit cross-legged, we end up sort of sitting here like this, knees sticking up in the air. And then we're putting a lot of strain in the groin and on the lower back. And then we're constantly having to straighten the back like this all the time. So if we're sitting here like this, because we're very stiff in the knees and the hips and the groin, we need to sit on more cushions so that the knees are at least level with the hips. Ideally, they are touching, so you have 3 points of contact, very stable. And so if you find that in meditation you're constantly straightening your back and then you're collapsing like this, it means you're not sitting on enough cushions. We need to sit on enough cushions so that our back is naturally straight. And with the legs, most of us sit cross-legged. If you're very flexible, of course, you can do what's called the full lotus. Put your foot on opposite thighs, but most of us, not very flexible, can't really do that. You can do sort of a half lotus where you have one foot on one leg and the other one underneath. You can sort of tuck it in here, but most people end up just sitting cross-legged, which is also okay. But sometimes when we sit cross-legged, what people find is that one or both legs, the circulation gets cut off, the leg goes numb, can't feel anything. For that, we can keep adjusting, and sometimes something under the knee can help with that. Another variation of, instead of being cross-legged, is you have one foot in front of the other, instead of crossing them. One in front of the other, and then often you don't have the problem of cutting circulation, because one's not lying on top of the other. So try that. That can also be helpful, useful. Some people have knee problems. Sitting cross-legged is painful. We don't want to be painful in meditation. It won't work. So find a posture that's not painful. If it's a little bit painful just because you're a bit stiff, then of course it's good to do some stretching exercises like yoga and so forth to prepare ourselves better. But if you have knee problems, you've got damaged knees and sitting cross-legged is painful, sit in a chair. Chair is fine. Now, what to do with the hands? Usually in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the one thing to recommend it is you place your right hand in your left, thumbs touching, and then you're resting in your lap like this. And that is symbolizing the two main aspects of practice of wisdom and compassion. And thumbs touching is that we practice them together. So that's often the one that is presented in Tibetan Buddhism. Some people find that a little bit uncomfortable. Then you can simply rest your hands on your knees. Fine as well. Some people have, from other traditions, have the palms facing upwards. Also okay. Just resting your arms is fine. Again, the two most important things is the back straight and then the body relaxed. Allow the body to be completely relaxed. In general, in meditation, it's recommended to have the eyes at least slightly open. If you have them closed, usually when we close our eyes, that's a signal to go to sleep. So we close our eyes in meditation, we get very sleepy. So very much recommended to have the eyes slightly open. Let some light in. Some people find, who are naturally very agitated sort of person, they find with the eyes slightly open, too much light, agitation. Then you may like to try with the eyes slightly closed. So again, this is something we can experiment with a little bit. But in general, recommended to have them slightly open. Any questions about the posture? Yeah.
With the hand holding, is it right and left or left and right?
Well, in the Tibetan tradition, you put your right in the left and thumbs touching. That's just the tradition. If you feel more comfortable doing opposites, it's fine. Not a big deal. But that's how it's presented, right? Because this is wisdom, compassion. So compassion needs to be supported on wisdom, and then thumbs touching to practice them together. That's just the way it's presented. But again, the main thing is just to be comfortable.
When your eyes is slightly open, do you focus at a certain point or something?
Sometimes mistakenly in a meditation text it says to focus on the tip of your nose. That's a mistranslation. If you do that, you're going to get cross-eyed and strain your eyes. The original text doesn't say focus on the tip of your nose. It says to focus in the line of your nose, slightly downward. But no, we're not looking at anything. We're just sort of keeping our eyes lightly open, not focusing on anything, because meditation is a mental exercise, not a visual exercise. So it's like sometimes it's like having your eyes open when you're daydreaming. You know, sometimes we're daydreaming, our eyes are open, but we're not really looking at anything. What we don't want to do with the eyes open is deliberately unfocus them, because that also strains the eyes. So just keep them soft and relaxed, and just allow a little bit of light in, but we're not looking at anything. Okay. So that's a little bit about the posture. So that's preparing the body. So preparing body, speech, mind. Preparing speech is not talking about verbal speech, it's talking about mental chit-chat. And that is, sometimes we come into the meditation, particularly we come in often sometimes with a very negative state of mind, a lot of negative stuff going on in our mind. And so of course at the beginning of meditation it's best of course to set a good positive motivation. But it's very hard to bring our mind from a negative state to a positive state. So what we can do is, if we are coming into the meditation a lot of blah 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 going on in our mind, particularly if it's negative, is to do a little breathing exercise to let go of that negative state of mind. So in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, sometimes that is presented as a very elaborate breathing exercise called the 9-round breathing exercise. And sometimes that comes together with very elaborate visualization, visualizing these what's called channels, imagining the breath comes down one side, out the other, and out the middle, and so forth. And then sometimes some traditions talk about counting 21 breaths. Some traditions talk about simply taking 3 deep breaths. All of those various meditation breath exercises at the beginning of a meditation session have the same purpose. The purpose is to let go of negative state of mind, bring the mind into a neutral state. So that's preparing speech. And part of that is then to simply allow the breathing, after you've done the breathing exercise, of course, if you're doing it, is to let the breathing flow naturally. So in meditation, we're not trying to control the breath. So we're not trying to make the breath rhythmic or deep or shallow or anything. Simply let the breathing do whatever it's doing. Because if we try to control the breathing, often people want to make it more subtle, and so they try, and then after some minutes they go, because they're not getting enough air in the lungs. So that's not helpful, because that's a distraction. So just let the breathing do whatever it's doing. Of course, there are certain meditation exercises, such as pranayama, which is breath manipulation. But that has its own purpose. But here, we're not doing that in the shamatha practice. Just let the breathing do whatever it's doing. So preparing body, speech, mind. So preparing the mind means two things really. One is to bring the mind into the present moment. Because often we're sort of in the past or in the future. Particularly in meditation, we tend to be a lot in the future. What's going to happen next in my practice? I hope I'm going to get this experience. I'm worried about getting that experience. So already we're jumping ahead in our meditation, full of expectation. So if we come into meditation with any sort of expectations or worries about anything, drop it, because it's just going to create an obstacle. We want to get into the present moment. And also, of course, to set a good motivation for the meditation. So that's preparing body, speech, and mind. So we want to make sure that we don't skip this at the beginning of a meditation session. Because if we just sit down and just start meditating and we haven't prepared ourselves well, then you're probably going to find more difficulty in the meditation. If we go through this preparation phase and prepare ourselves well, more likely the meditation will go much better. Then I just want to talk about one thing, and then we're going to do a little meditation exercise before we finish this evening. And that is, in this shamatha training, what qualities are we trying to develop or cultivate? So remember we said in the shamatha practice, we're developing single-pointed concentration. We're cultivating mindfulness to improve our attention skills. So one quality we're wanting to cultivate is what's called stability. So stability, or a stable mind, means the ability to focus on the object without becoming distracted. So the fault we're trying to overcome to develop stability is distraction.
Please repeat.
So the first quality we are cultivating in the shamatha practice is stability. A stable mind means a mind that can focus on an object without becoming distracted. So we're trying to, by overcoming distraction, we have a more stable mind. But not only do we want stability, not only do we want to be able to focus on an object without becoming distracted, we want to be able to focus on the object in a very clear way. So the second quality we're cultivating is clarity. And so the fault that we're trying to overcome to develop clarity, of course, is dullness. Our mind is very dull and sleepy. We're not focusing clearly on the object. So normally in the meditation texts, these are the two qualities that are described for shamatha practice that we're cultivating. A stable mind and a clear mind. But I always add a third quality that usually isn't mentioned in the meditation text, but it's something we need to pay close attention to, particularly in our modern society. And that is relaxation. Most of us, of course, in the modern world have very busy, hectic, fast-paced lives, constantly bombarded by stimulus. Our minds are very chaotic. And so therefore, in our modern world, if we want to focus on an object or task, what we naturally do is we tense to focus. Because if we don't tense, we just get distracted. Unfortunately, tensing works a little bit. We can focus a bit if we tense, but it comes at a huge cost. And we know this well. If we focus on something, a task or activity, with a lot of tension for a long time, we become completely exhausted and we often become very agitated. So this is not the approach we want to bring into this practice. So the fault that we're trying to overcome here is tension. And as a beginner, the thing that tends to cause us most difficulty is exactly this. We're too tight, we're too tense, we're trying too hard. If we want to meditate in general, or in particular if we want to practice this shamatha practice, if we want to cultivate mindfulness and meditation, the very first thing we need to do is we need to learn how to relax. Relax the body, relax the mind. Because without relaxation, we're not going to be able to develop stability and clarity. It won't happen. Now, of course, when we are focused, we're tense. And when we relax, we become very sleepy. So we're either focused and tense or relaxed and sleepy. What we want to do is combine those two. We want to be relaxed and focused. That's what we're trying to achieve. That's something we have to learn newly. We don't know how to be relaxed and focused. So in these 5 days, if all you manage to do in the whole 5 days is you learn to relax a little bit, very good, success. Because this is the basis, relaxation. Relax body, relax mind. So we're going to emphasize this a lot in the coming days, is to work with relaxation. The more relaxed we are, the easier it is to develop stability and clarity. Any questions about that? Okay. So what we're going to do briefly now, to wrap up this evening, is we're going to do a short meditation, so we're going to do 15 minutes. So in this retreat, where most of our meditation sessions will be 20 minutes, but here in the evening to finish off, we'll keep it to 15. And what I want to do in this 15 minutes is emphasize 2 things. One is the preparation, preparing body, speech and mind. And then we'll do a little bit of a mindfulness meditation on the breath and just emphasize relaxation as the main thing. Now, the breath practice that we're going to do And we're going to focus on the breath mainly in the next day or so. There are some different variations of the breath practice. In some Buddhist traditions, when they do the breath practice, we're focusing at the entrance of the nostrils. Other Buddhist traditions focus at the abdomen. But for relaxation, we're going to do what's called the full body breath practice. And that is simply noticing sensations anywhere in the body associated with the breathing. So when you're breathing, if you notice any sensations anywhere connected with the breathing, maybe the moving of the abdomen, stomach, chest moving, some sensations in the throat, nostrils, anywhere in this area. And you can move around. You don't have to stay in one place. So it's a very diffuse object we're focusing on. And the main emphasis here is simply relaxation, particularly on the out-breath. On the out-breath, just really relax the body and relax the mind more and more and more on every out-breath. And then on the in-breath, we can focus a little bit more on the keeping connected with the sensations of the breath in the body. So that's what we're going to do now. Any questions? Is that clear? Let's do that. 15 minutes. Allowing your awareness to descend into the body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out-breath to relax and release that tightness or tension as best you can. And then bringing your awareness to the area of your face and soften and relax all the muscles in the face. The mouth and jaw, soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes, soft and relaxed.